My grandson said it so quietly I almost missed it. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, just the two of us, because his mother had gone upstairs to take a shower, and my son-in-law was still at work. I was helping him with a puzzle, one of those 500-piece ones with a lighthouse on the coast of Maine. He's 7, sharp kid, doesn't miss much. He picked up a puzzle piece, turned it in his little fingers, and without looking up, he said, "Grandpa, why does Uncle Damon put medicine in Grandma's tea?" I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought I'd heard him wrong. The refrigerator was making a sound. The TV down the hall had something playing low, and I was 63 years old with ears that weren't what they used to be. "What was that, buddy?" I said. He finally looked up. "Uncle Damon, when Grandma's sleeping on the couch, he puts something from a little bottle into her tea. Then she keeps sleeping." I set down the puzzle piece I was holding. My wife, his grandmother, had been having these spells for about 4 months, falling asleep in the middle of the day, forgetting things, walking from one room to the next, and standing there like she'd lost the thread of why she'd come. Our family doctor had run tests, mentioned early onset cognitive decline, said we might want to see a neurologist. I had cried in the parking lot of that medical office. 63 years old, and I sat in my truck and cried because the woman I'd been married to for 38 years was disappearing in front of me, and nobody could tell me why. Nobody except a 7-year-old with a lighthouse puzzle. "Buddy," I said very slowly, "how many times did you see Uncle Damon do that?" He thought about it. He's a serious kid when he thinks. Counts on his fingers sometimes without realizing it. "A lot," he said. "Maybe like 5 or 6. Sometimes when you go to the store." Damon was my daughter's husband. He'd moved into our house 14 months ago when they hit financial trouble. He'd lost a job, she was working part-time, and they had a 2-year-old besides the boy. We had the space. It was supposed to be temporary. 8 months, maybe 10, just until they got back on their feet. I'd said yes because my daughter was struggling, and I loved her. That's the only reason. I didn't like Damon. I want to be honest about that. There was something about him I had never trusted, some quality I couldn't name, the way he'd answer a question with a compliment instead of an answer, the way he'd leave a room right when the conversation got specific. But I told myself it was my own stubbornness, an old man's instinct to distrust someone who'd married his daughter and moved into his house. I told myself to be fair. I had no idea how wrong I was to doubt myself. I told my grandson to keep playing with the puzzle and went to find the tea my wife had been drinking that afternoon. She was asleep on the couch right then, had been for 2 hours. The mug was still on the end table, half empty, gone cold. I picked it up with a dish towel, not wanting to put my fingerprints on it. I don't know where that instinct came from. Maybe I'd watched too much true crime with my wife on Sunday nights. But something in me said, be careful. I poured what was left of the tea into a clean glass jar I found in the pantry and sealed it. Then I went upstairs to the bathroom cabinet. I'd been in that cabinet 100 times. It was my house, my cabinet, but I was looking now with different eyes. I found his shaving kit on the second shelf, and inside it, behind his deodorant and a pack of Band-Aids, there was a small brown dropper bottle, no label, clear liquid inside. I photographed it with my phone. Then I left everything exactly as it was. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark next to my wife and listened to her breathe, and tried to understand what kind of man moves into someone else's home and does something like this. I kept arriving at the same wall. I couldn't get past it. Even now, writing this down, I still can't fully explain it to myself. But that night in the dark, I made 2 decisions. The first was that I would not say a word to anyone in that house, not to my daughter, not to my wife, not to Damon. The second was that I would find out exactly what was in that bottle before I did anything else. The next morning, I drove to a lab testing service 2 towns over. You can do this without a doctor's order. Walk-in toxicology, the kind they use for legal cases and HR situations. I brought the jar of tea, and explained that I had reason to believe someone had put a substance in a drink without the person's knowledge. The technician, a young woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, told me results would take 3 to 5 business days and handed me a form. 5 days felt like 5 years. I went about my normal routine, came home for lunch, watched my wife sleep in the afternoon, made excuses to be in the kitchen when Damon was there, watching his hands without appearing to watch. He was charming in that way of his. Easy smile, always a story ready. He called me sir in a way that sounded respectful and managed to feel like mockery at the same time. My daughter didn't notice anything wrong. She was tired. She was always tired, working the morning shift at the clinic and coming home to 2 kids, and a husband who seemed to fill a room without doing anything in it. I watched her move through the house and wondered what she knew and what she didn't, and whether that distinction even mattered. On the 4th day, my wife fell asleep again in the early afternoon. Damon had been home all morning. I sat in the armchair across from her and watched her sleep and felt something that had no good name. Not quite rage, not quite grief. Both, maybe, layered over each other. The results came back on a Tuesday. The technician called me at 9:14 in the morning. I was in the driveway sitting in my truck. She asked if I was in a private location. I said yes. She told me the tea sample contained a measurable concentration of a sedative compound, specifically flunitrazepam. The brand name is Rohypnol. In some states, it's still prescribed in limited circumstances, but it's been a controlled Schedule I substance for decades and is far more commonly known as a drug used to incapacitate people without their consent. Someone had been putting Rohypnol into my wife's tea. I thanked the technician. I sat in my truck for a long time. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. A school bus went by. I watched it until it turned at the corner and disappeared. Then I called the police. 2 officers came to the house that afternoon when my daughter was at work and the kids were at a neighbor's. Damon was home. I'd asked the officers to come while he was there, and I gave them the jar of tea and the photographs of the bottle, and I showed them where the bottle still sat in his shaving kit. Because I had checked that morning, and it was still there. They arrested him in my kitchen. He looked at me when they put the handcuffs on him. He didn't say anything. That look on his face, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it was. It wasn't quite surprise and it wasn't quite anger. It was more like a man recalculating. My daughter came home an hour later. There is no good way to tell your daughter that the man she married has been drugging her mother in the house where they were all living together. There's no version of that sentence that lands gently. I sat her down at the kitchen table and I told her everything. The boy's words, the sample, the test results, the arrest. I went in order, slowly the way you do when you want someone to understand each piece before they have to carry the whole thing. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "How long?" I said the lab couldn't date the samples, only identify the substance. But based on when my wife's symptoms first started, the forgetting, the daytime sleeping, the confusion, it had likely been going on for the better part of a year. She put her face in her hands. I found out the rest over the following weeks as the investigation unfolded and Damon's situation became clearer. He had a life insurance policy on my wife. He had taken it out 11 months before, listing himself as a secondary beneficiary after my daughter. And my wife had never known about it because he had handled the paperwork. He'd forged her signature on the application. The policy was worth $400,000. That number sat in my chest like a stone. A man had moved into my home under the cover of family loyalty, and he had been quietly sedating my wife, watching her health deteriorate, waiting. The neurologist had almost given her a diagnosis of early dementia. If things had gone differently, if my grandson hadn't said something, if I hadn't listened, she might have received that diagnosis. She might have declined further. And at some point, the sedative could have been increased, or something else could have happened. and nobody would have looked twice because the paperwork already existed to tell a story about a sick woman who had been declining for months. I can barely write this without my hand shaking. Even now, the DA's office charged Damon with criminal administration of a controlled substance, insurance fraud, and felony elder abuse. That last one came with enhanced sentencing under our state's law because my wife was over 60. He was held on bond he couldn't make because his family wanted nothing to do with it. He sat in county lockup for the duration of the pretrial period. My wife recovered. That's the part I want to say clearly, because when you get this far into a story like this, you need something to hold on to, and she is mine. Once the sedative was out of her system, the fog began to lift. Within 3 weeks, she was sharper. Within 2 months, she was herself. Calling friends, tending her garden, staying up past 10 o'clock to watch her programs. Her doctor was stunned. The neurologist, when I told him what had happened, sat back in his chair and said he'd never seen anything quite like it. My wife sat beside me in that office and held my hand the entire time. My daughter filed for divorce the week after the arrest. She didn't hesitate, not really. Whatever illusions she'd had about her marriage had been put in that brown dropper bottle along with everything else. She stayed in the house with us, with the kids, while the legal process moved forward. It wasn't easy. There were nights I could hear her crying in the room down the hall, and I'd get up and stand by her door and not know whether to knock or let her be. Mostly, I let her be. Grief needs room. You can't rush it out. What Damon got in the end was 11 years. The judge cited the premeditated nature of the drugging, the forged insurance documents, and the sustained period over which the abuse occurred. His attorney had argued for a lighter sentence, said he had no prior criminal history, said the insurance policy could have been coincidental. The prosecutor put my wife on the stand. She sat up there in her blue cardigan, the one she's had for 15 years. And she told the jury about the months she couldn't remember properly, about the afternoon she found herself standing in her own backyard, not knowing how she'd gotten there, about waking up on the couch over and over and feeling like she'd lost pieces of herself. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, 11 years. No early parole eligibility for the first 7 under the elder abuse enhancement. The insurance company cooperated with the prosecution and the fraudulent policy was voided. My daughter walked away from the marriage with nothing owed to him, no shared assets, because nearly everything was mine and my wife's to begin with, and his fraud claim against the estate was thrown out. She received full physical and legal custody of both children. Child support was ordered, though collecting it from a man in state prison is its own category of problem. The boy, my grandson, doesn't know everything. He knows that Uncle Damon did something that hurt Grandma, and that's why he isn't here anymore, and that what he told me was one of the bravest things anyone has ever done. I told him that myself, sitting at that same kitchen table with the lighthouse puzzle still in its box on the shelf above us. He nodded very seriously and asked if we could do the puzzle now. We did. I think about the version of things where I don't hear him, where I'm in the other room, or the TV is too loud, or I just say, "That's strange, buddy," and let it go. I think about my wife getting a dementia diagnosis she didn't deserve, being moved to a memory care facility, declining. I think about the insurance payout and what Damon would have done with $400,000, and a story about a wife who'd been sick for years. I can't stay in that version very long. What I know is this: I am 63 years old, and I have made plenty of mistakes in my life, things I'd go back and change if I could. But when my grandson handed me the truth in the plainest possible language, I listened. I didn't dismiss it. I didn't make excuses for the man I'd never trusted and had spent a year talking myself into tolerating. I listened to a 7-year-old and I took him seriously, and that made all the difference. My wife planted tomatoes this spring. First time in 2 years, she felt steady enough to do the whole garden herself. I watched her from the kitchen window, out there in her old jeans and her work gloves, kneeling in the dirt, putting things in the ground she intended to see come back up. There are moments that stay with you. That was one of them. If you take anything from what happened to us, take this. The people who want to hurt you are counting on the fact that you won't believe what's right in front of you. They build their plans on your willingness to look the other way, to find the charitable explanation, to trust the version of the story they've handed you. The moment you start actually looking, really looking with clear eyes, is the moment their plan falls apart. Don't wait for something to go wrong before you start paying attention. And if a child tells you something, no matter how small it sounds, stop what you're doing and listen.